It's now just after 9:30, and with the main news, Richard Baker.
The nation decides who goes to number 10. A heavy turnout is reported in spite of the weather. There was the bleak nip of winter in some parts, especially in the north and northwest. From all quarters, the votes will be carried to the count in half an hour. A terrorist attack in Rome leaves 1 policeman dead, 2 badly hurt. A Stradivarius sells for a record £145,000. And in Japan, the police brush up on security for the economic summit. But first, the waiting game at home, where there's just half an hour to go before polling closes and the counting of votes in the general election can begin. But although the shape of the next Parliament and government won't be known for several hours at least, one prediction is already being made with confidence. The professional poll watchers agree there's been a big turnout. The chilly weather, even snow and hail in some parts, seems to have done nothing to discourage people. Our reporters around the country have been watching how the voting went.
In the Highlands, there was snow overnight and more flurries throughout the day. But they didn't deter the oldest man in Braemar, 90-year-old Joseph Lamb, who's voted in every election since 1910. The bad weather, though, has worried the party organisers, particularly in the more marginal Highland constituencies. In the cities, like here in Aberdeen, polling has been brisk, well up on 1974 levels. The biggest poll may well come here in Dumbartonshire East, the country's most marginal constituency. On the result of the last election, it would take only 12 of these voters to change sides for the Tories to take the seat from the SNP, and Labour are only 400 votes behind. All the parties say voting seems to have been generally heavier in Scotland this time than in recent elections, and all say this will be to their advantage.
In the Midlands, polling's reported to be brisk, and in parts of Birmingham considerably heavier than usual, with some agents predicting a record poll. Most places have had bright weather, though in Nottingham and Stoke there's been some snow, but even that doesn't appear to have deterred the voters. As always, in the Midlands, with its large number of factories, voting started early. Many night workers went to the polling stations at the end of their shift, and others voted on the way to work. The other peak was about 2 hours ago. Of course, in England and Wales, there's also voting in the district council elections, which traditionally have a lower turnout than the general election. So, inevitably this time, more people will be casting their votes for their local councillors.
In the capital, polling's been heavy, with bright weather to entice out the not particularly fervent voter. However, it would seem that some don't need encouraging, for one official in central London found an eager queue on the doorstep of his polling station before he'd unlocked the doors. First time that's happened in 30 years, said he. Unfortunately, in the Tower Hamlets district, 250 people were denied the chance to do anything at a polling station. They'd been left off the register because of the borough's strike problems. However, they'll be able to express their opinion of their council at a later date, because local elections aren't being held in London today.
One of Britain's most unusual polling stations, a double-decker bus in Essex. It's been booked for 15 hours to stand on a playing field in the village of Bardfield Sailing near Braintree. There was no suitable building where the 143 electors could cast their votes, so election officials came up with the poll on wheels scheme. The bus is more frequently used for taking seaside trippers along the prom at Southend, but these Essex electors voted their makeshift polling station just the ticket.
Simply getting ballot boxes to St Mary's involves a 20-minute flight by helicopter. There are scores of islands in the group, but only 5 are inhabited. So collecting the votes on Briar, St Agnes, Tresco and St Martin's means invoking the help of Solonian boatmen. The returning officer, Mr Len Michel, is responsible for tiny polling stations on every off-island. The most westerly voters of all live on St Agnes. There's nothing but the sea between them and New York. But the polling station, which doubles as a reading room and doctor's surgery, will stay open until 10 o'clock tonight in the hope of attracting all 52 electors. Between them, the Isles of Scilly can offer 1,450 votes. Tomorrow, the boxes will all be flown to the mainland, separated from the parliamentary ballot, and then returned to the islands before the second count begins.
There have been no local elections in Northern Ireland, but for the voters there has been one ever-present problem. Extra soldiers and police were called out to guard the polling stations in the province against terrorist threats. And as Christopher Morris reports, they left nothing to chance.
30,000 soldiers and policemen have been protecting Northern Ireland's polling stations. Much tighter security than usual because of the many murders by provisional IRA gunmen in the past 3 weeks. At first, polling was slow, but improved to a steady, brisk pace during the day without any serious incidents. Voters had been urged not to carry parcels and shopping bags, and those who did were searched before being allowed inside. Because of the threat of terrorist attacks, even the ballot boxes are to be given an armed escort. Later tonight, they'll be carried by the army in convoys to Northern Ireland's 9 counting centres, like this one at Belfast City Hall. And all the ballot boxes will be closely guarded overnight, since counting won't even begin until 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, thus making Northern Ireland's election results among the last to be declared. One overnight target for the terrorists was the Anderson's Town police station, sealed off because of a suspect bomb in this bus, hijacked and abandoned outside by 2 men. The army had to blow it up before the area was finally given the all-clear. Generally, though, polling was uninterrupted by the terrorist violence many had been fearing. The show of strength by the security forces seems to have effectively deterred the gunmen and the bombers.
Northern Ireland apart, there'll be more results declared tonight than usual. 519 constituencies are planning to count overnight. But before they can begin, officials will first have to sort the parliamentary ballots from those cast in the local elections. Nick Clark has been to Salford to see how this complication is being coped with.
The permanent staff at Salford say they'd rather have the 2 elections at once than have them a week or so apart, which would be even more difficult to administer. However, different rules for thousands of parliamentary and local postal votes have made it necessary to work through Easter, at weekends and late at night. And extra staff have had to be found for the 207 polling stations in the city, 800 instead of 500.
Do you solemnly promise and declare that you will not...
Each was sworn to secrecy and will earn up to £32 for 15 hours on duty, supervising the election of 4 MPs and 23 local councillors.
Having been read out to you. Thank you very much.
Salford has other problems too. Polling stations were set to take votes in the same box for constituencies outside the city, as well as its own local council. The reverse was true too. It sounds fiendishly complicated, but will apparently work with planning. Certainly the polling itself today presented few problems. Some explanations were required about the grey local council ballot papers and the white ones for the general election. But most people adapted to the process, including putting both papers in the same box.
Well, those Salford ballot boxes will be arriving at 4 counting centres around the city within about half an hour or so from now. That's at Farnworth, Eccles and the 2 Salford seats, both of which declare here at the City Art Gallery. And the first job facing the 75 or so counters in each constituency, that's about the normal number, will be to sort out the local and the national votes. Then they'll have to check each lot against the polling station lists. The next thing will be that the local votes will be locked away under police guard for the rest of the night, and the parliamentary count, the count proper, can get underway. Now, Salford East has always been pretty proud about being among the first to declare. So what will happen this time after the delays caused by that double checking? Well, they say they won't be racing to make up for lost time. All they'll say, rather coyly, is that their staff will be keen to get home as quickly as they can. And you can be sure that competition will be just as fierce as ever to finish the job as quickly as possible.
As the real polling began this morning, there was a last word from the opinion pollsters. The final poll, published in today's London Evening Standard, gave the Conservatives a lead of 8%. Conducted by Maury yesterday, it put Conservative support at 45%, Labour at 37%, and the Liberals 15%. Others 3%. The party leaders, who'll all be up late tonight to hear the verdict of the electorate, were also up early this morning to join the first voters. In Scotland, David Steele reached the polls 10 minutes after they opened. Mrs Thatcher voted in London and Mr Callaghan in Cardiff.
Mr Callaghan voted in his own constituency of Cardiff South East. He and his wife turned up early at the polling station, a school on the outskirts of the city. And here he was to discover just what it's like for the voter on this unusual multiple voting day.
These ballot papers, a day's work to fill them in.
You've got them all now. It's going in. It's the last one, I promise you.
Hundreds more ballot papers were to follow Mr Callaghan's into the ballot box, but things were quieter at the hamlet of Rose Hill outside Cardiff. There are only 4 people on the electoral roll there, 2 couples living next door to each other. And once they'd voted at the polling station, one of the 2 cottages they occupy, business was over for the day. But the returning officer was obliged by law to stay at his post until closing time that evening.
Mrs Thatcher was to have walked from her home to the polling station, but because of the crowd, she drove.
Good morning, Mrs Thatcher. How do you feel?
She voted along with her husband and son, Mark, and then spent the day in her own constituency and at Conservative Central Office. Her own result is expected before 2 a.m. Then it's back to Central Office to monitor the party's progress in the rest of the country, to see if she is to become Britain's first woman Prime Minister.
The little polling station at Ettrick Bridge had been open just 10 minutes when the Liberal leader, Mr Steele, emerged to become one of the country's first voters. But then he and his wife Judy didn't have far to go. Apart from the flurry of activity from bleary-eyed newsmen, it was an event that caused little interest in this still sleepy Scottish village. Then, as early morning sunlight turned to snow, the Steeles went home for breakfast, no doubt wondering whether the electorate would be as fickle as the weather.
Polling day brought a big rise in share prices on the stock exchange. At the close, the Financial Times index was up more than 8 points on yesterday. It's now nearly its highest ever recorded level. It's been a good day too for the bookies. With a few minutes still to go before polling ends, the big firms are reporting record takings. And Philip Campbell's been finding out who the punters have been putting their money on.
The volume of last-minute betting means that the bookies now estimate they've taken over £8 million on this election, even though the odds seem decidedly poor.
£30 Liberals at 14 seats.
So instead, many punters are betting on Liberal seats and marginals. There was a flurry of betting on Labour last weekend when the polls were narrowing. One client investing over £12,000 for an overall Labour majority. But you have to go to Epsom in Surrey to find the punter who's put most at stake. He's shop owner Tony Barlow, who, as long ago as the government's defeat last month, put £30,000 sterling on an overall Conservative majority at odds of 9-4 on. A married man with 4 children, he says he's still confident of winning. But with the polls narrowing, isn't he sweating just a little bit?
Well, a little bit. It was expected it would a little bit. A lot of my friends tried to get me very rattled, but they haven't succeeded. I've kept calm and been quite happy all the way along.
Can you afford to lose?
I could afford it, but I wouldn't like to lose it. And I don't even think about it because it just is not going to happen.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not quite as confident as he is, but he's never let us down in all the years that we've been together. I have threatened him that if he loses, I shall make him sell his new car, which won't make him very happy.
Lynn Barlow has her own transport and was referring to the new Rolls Tony bought last month. But rather than consider selling, he's taken out a second bet just this week. So now, unless Mrs Thatcher wins an overall majority, he stands to lose over £42,000, plus of course £2,000 more in government tax.
Well, by this time tomorrow, the outcome will be known and punters' winnings collected or betting slips torn up. The earliest results are expected about 2 hours from now, and in the race for the first declaration, Glasgow Central may have the edge on traditional English frontrunners because there are no local elections in Scotland to complicate counting. The BBC results programme, Decision 79, goes on the air from the election studio here at Television Centre after this news. Later, the main part of Decision 79 begins at 10:55. It'll be presented by David Dimbleby, and Angela Rippon will be giving an hourly election summary. Incoming results will be fed directly to a BBC election computer for immediate updating and analysis. Decision 79 will be on the air until 4 o'clock tomorrow morning and returns at 7 o'clock with further election news. In Italy, with only a month before their general election, there's been an attack on the Rome headquarters of the ruling Christian Democratic Party. 1 policeman was killed and 2 seriously injured in a gun battle with a gang of terrorists who set off several bombs inside the building. The terrorists, about 15 in number, including 3 girls, robbed the staff, handcuffed them and ordered them out of the offices before the bombs went off. No group has claimed responsibility, but the gang scrawled political slogans on the walls and also the five-pointed star, symbol of the Red Brigade. As the terrorists left, a car containing 3 plainclothes policemen arrived and a girl member of the gang opened fire with a submachine gun. One of the policemen was killed and the other 2 critically wounded. So far, no trace of the gang has been found. In Iran, several 100,000 people marched through Tehran in a funeral procession for the Ayatollah Motahari, who was shot dead on Tuesday. He was a close associate of the Ayatollah Khomeini and a member of Iran's Revolutionary Council.
Starting from Tehran University, the center of resistance to the Shah before the revolution, the crowd followed the coffin of Ayatollah Motahari through the city center. The coffin was draped in black and the Ayatollah's turban rested on top. Although the killing has been claimed by a fundamental Islamic group, the people have obviously decided it was really the fault of the left wing. There were cries of death to communism. The official slogan, victory to Islam and down with disruptionists, was largely ignored. The large number of people who have turned out for the procession was an indication of, despite the political uncertainty in Iran, the country's spiritual leader, Ayatollah Khomeini, still has overwhelming support. The government had declared the day a national day of mourning, and all shops and businesses have been shut.
The Central Electricity Generating Board says that part of Dungeness nuclear power complex in Kent has been closed down because of minute cracks in the cooling system of one of the reactors at Dungeness A. The reactor was shut down after a routine inspection, and so far it's cost the board £2.5 million through having to generate power at less efficient coal and oil-fired plants. A CEGB spokesman says there's absolutely no question of a safety or radiation hazard. A coroner has suggested that an abortion on a fetus that lived for 37 hours afterwards was technically a criminal abortion. Opening what's thought to be the first ever inquest on an aborted fetus, the coroner at Barnsley in Yorkshire said the Director of Public Prosecutions would be given the opportunity to decide whether or not a prosecution should be brought. The mother was admitted to the town's hospital after signs that she'd contracted German measles, which might have handicapped the child. But today the coroner questioned whether the abortion was necessary to save the life and health of the mother, as he said it should have been under the Act. He adjourned the inquest until June. A world record price was paid today for a Stradivarius violin, auctioned with other valuable instruments at Sotheby's in London. As Bill Spencer reports, it was bought for £145,000.
The Stradivarius came from a private collection in Switzerland, and when it was put on view before the sale, provided a rare opportunity for musicians to try it out. The previous record for a Stradivarius was a mere £99,000, and there was little doubt when bidding began at £80,000 that a new record was going to be set. £100,000 was reached in just 3 bids.
At £142,000 bid then, at £142,000, £145,000. At £145,000 it's against you in the room. Bid is here then at £145,000, against you all in the room at £145,000.
And it was all over in 60 seconds, sold to an anonymous European. What are the qualities that make this Stradivarius worth so much more than any other violin?
Well, it's probably the finest violin that we've had the opportunity to sell at Sotheby's since the Lady Blunt in 1971. It's in the most marvellous condition. And of course it does have a particularly fine provenance, as it belonged to Branislaw Huberman, but probably better known would be Fritz Kreisler, as a much-loved violinist, and this is the violin that he used in the early part of his career.
Today's price reflects an astonishing rise in the price of fine musical instruments. Until 1971, the most paid for any violin had been £22,000.
This year's first racing classic, the 1,000 Guineas, ended in victory for the favourite, 1 in a million, who remains unbeaten. The commentator at Newmarket is Peter Bromley.
and it is 1 in a million who's clear of Jubilee, Yanuka, Lyric Dance, Devon Ditty, and then comes Topsy and Petasia as they meet the rising ground. They've got a furlong to go, and it's 1 in a million with Jubilee closing the gap. Yanuka's coming late on the scene on the stand side, so too is Topsy, and also finishing well is Abbeydale. They've got 100 yards to go, and 1 in a million is holding on from fast finishing Abbeydale, who's second, Yanuka is third, Topsy is fourth, Devon Ditty fifth, then Jubilee, Petasia, and Lyric Dance.
The odds, 1 in a million evens, Abbeydale 25 to 1 and Yanuka 33 to 1. Soccer, and Kenny Sansom, the young Crystal Palace defender, and Nottingham Forest's Trevor Francis are the two new faces in Ron Greenwood's latest England squad. They join 22 other players for selection for the Home International Championship and the summer tour of Bulgaria, Sweden and Austria. French Sports Minister Jean-Pierre Soisson said today that the South African Springbok rugby union team will be banned from touring France. The minister said they could not offend African countries. The tour, planned for October, has threatened France's participation in the 1980 Olympics. Whoever is Prime Minister tomorrow, one of the first major international commitments will be to attend the World Economic Summit meeting being held in Japan at the end of next month. Leading world statesmen will be attending the meeting, and already police in Tokyo are polishing up their security preparations. A report from Bob Friend.
Japan's police, with years of experience dealing with violent anti-airport protests behind them, are ready for any eventuality. Scene 1, 2 right-wing extremists with an unidentified visiting statesman as their target. With an eye for tradition, their weapons are long, sharp knives. But in the event, they were intercepted before they could even ruffle the world statesman. The police, who were watched by Tokyo's Metropolitan Police Commissioner, are part of a force of 26,000 who will be mobilized to protect world leaders from the rough treatment handed out to the unfortunate police who played rioters for a day. The exercise, shown on Japanese television, was obviously designed as a deterrent. The Molotov cocktails were actually pieces of wood with a lighted rag on the end, but the pushing and shoving was real enough. Miraculously, only one policeman was injured. After the rightists, it was the turn of policemen dressed in the unmistakable uniform of Japanese leftists. There's no question about the message. The banner says, "Destroy the summit meeting." Police say that security is so good, nothing like this will happen. But with so many VIPs on Japanese soil, they're obviously not taking any chances. This is Bob Friend in Tokyo, Japan.
And now, before we take a look at the closing headlines in London, let's ask Ian McCaskill what the weather's elected to do. Ian.
Hello. Well, from probabilities, let's have a look at the racing certainty. We're going to have a very cold night tonight, with frost just about everywhere. This northwesterly run of winds is with us for another 48 hours. But later on in the weekend, pressure will rise from the southwest, bringing less cold weather and drier weather to many parts by Sunday. Still frost at night, though. Let's look at tonight's weather now. Well, wintry showers continuing around these northern and western coasts, and some running in as far as the Midlands too at times. Generally speaking, though, mainly dry and clear, frost just about everywhere, 1 or 2 icy roads, even some patches of mist or fog in eastern England for a time before dawn. And then tomorrow, starting off bright and sunny in many districts, but like today, showers again developing, some of them heavy and wintry too in places, especially on high ground and in the north. Temperatures just about everywhere, like today, about 5 centigrade, that's 9 Fahrenheit degrees below average, but between the showers, a good deal of pleasant May sunshine. That's all the weather from me then, staying cloudy in the north, showers and sunshine elsewhere. Back now to Richard Baker.
Thank you. And so on this election day, back to the main points of the news once again. It looks as though there's been a big turnout for the general election. The first results should be known in less than 2 hours. In Rome, 1 policeman has been killed and 2 others seriously wounded in a new terrorist attack. And a violin by Stradivarius has been sold for a record £145,000. And so that's the election day news from me, but by no means the end of BBC's coverage of the election. With only 5 minutes before polls close, you've probably left it too late to vote. But you are in time to join David Dimbleby and his team in the BBC election studio, where he's waiting to introduce Decision 79.